My brother's wife secretly recorded our family dinner, and I just found the footage. I'm shaking as I type this, and I don't know what to do with what I just discovered. Last Sunday was our monthly family dinner at my parents' house. Nothing unusual. Mom makes her famous lasagna, Dad complains about his back, and we all pretend my brother Jake's wife Sarah isn't completely weird. Sarah has always been off. She asks too many personal questions, remembers things you mentioned months ago, and has this unsettling way of staring at people when she thinks they're not looking. During dinner, Sarah kept her phone propped against her water glass, angled toward the table. I thought she was just being rude, scrolling social media or something. She does this a lot, so we've all gotten used to ignoring it. But then I noticed she wasn't actually looking at the screen. She was watching us while pretending to be distracted. The conversation got heated when my dad brought up my recent promotion at work. My mom started gushing about how proud she was, and then somehow it turned into this whole thing about my dating life. Sarah just sat there, barely eating, with that weird little smile she gets when drama unfolds. Her phone never moved from that position. After dinner, Sarah excused herself to use the bathroom upstairs. She was gone for nearly 20 minutes. When she came back, she seemed almost excited, like she was trying to contain some kind of energy. She kept glancing at her phone and biting her lip. Yesterday, I was at Jake's house helping him move some furniture. Sarah was at work, so it was just us brothers hanging out, like old times. I went to grab a drink from the kitchen and saw Sarah's laptop open on the counter. The screen was still active, showing what looked like a video editing program. I shouldn't have looked. I know I shouldn't have. But there on the screen was footage from our family dinner. Crystal clear audio and video of our entire conversation, shot from the angle of where Sarah's phone had been positioned. The file was labeled Family Dinner November Evidence.mp4, and there were dozens of other similar files in the folder. My stomach dropped. I could see timestamps going back months, maybe even a year. Every family gathering, every birthday, every holiday dinner, all recorded, all saved, all labeled with dates and what looked like keywords. Dad_money_talk, mom_health_scare, Jake_job_problems. I heard Jake's footsteps coming toward the kitchen. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and took a quick photo of the screen, then quickly closed the laptop. Jake walked in just as I was pretending to look through their fridge. But here's the thing that's making me physically sick. I saw another folder on that desktop. It was labeled with my name, just my name, and it was full of files. Jake has no idea. He was laughing about something completely oblivious to what his wife has been doing to our family. I wanted to tell him right there, but something held me back. Maybe it was the look of pure happiness on his face, or maybe it was the fear of what those files with my name might contain. I got home and immediately called my parents. But what am I supposed to say? Hey mom, your daughter-in-law has been secretly recording our family for months? They'd think I was crazy. They'd want proof, and showing them that photo would mean admitting I snooped through Sarah's computer. But I can't stop thinking about those files. What has she been collecting? What is she planning to do with hours of footage of our private family moments? And why does she have an entire folder dedicated specifically to me? I couldn't sleep last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that folder with my name on it. By 3 a.m., I was pacing around my apartment, replaying every interaction I've had with Sarah over the past 2 years. The way she'd ask about my work projects in such specific detail. How she always seemed to know when I was going through a rough patch before I'd even told Jake. The questions about my ex-girlfriend that felt too personal, too probing. I kept staring at the photo on my phone, zooming in on those file names. There had to have been at least 30 files in my folder alone. 30! What could she possibly have recorded that required 30 separate files? By morning, I'd made up my mind. I had to go back. I called Jake around 10 a.m., trying to sound casual. Hey, need any more help with that furniture? I'm free this afternoon. Actually, that'd be great, he said. Sarah's working a double shift today, won't be home until midnight. We could probably knock out the rest of the living room. Perfect. I had hours. When I got to their house, Jake was already deep in dismantling their entertainment center. I helped for about an hour, making small talk, waiting for the right moment. When he went out to the garage to grab more tools, I slipped into the kitchen. The laptop was in the same spot, but closed this time. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The screen was locked, but I remembered Sarah's password from watching her type it in during a family game night months ago. It was Jake's birthday, followed by their anniversary year. She'd made a big show of how romantic it was. The desktop loaded, and there it was, that folder with my name. I clicked it, and my stomach immediately dropped. The files weren't just recordings from family dinners. There were videos of me at my apartment building, clearly taken from a car parked across the street. Photos of me at the grocery store, at the gym, at the coffee shop I go to every morning before work. Some of these were dated over a year ago, long before I'd even noticed her acting strange. But the worst part was a subfolder labeled Phone Calls. I opened it with trembling fingers. Audio files. Hours and hours of audio files.
She'd somehow been recording my phone conversations, private calls with my friends, my boss, my doctor, everything. There was even a file labeled Mom Cancer Scare Private Call from when my mother had that false alarm with her mammogram results 6 months ago. I'd specifically asked my family not to discuss it until we knew more, but somehow Sarah had recorded my panicked call to my best friend about it. I heard Jake's footsteps on the garage steps. Frantically, I clicked on the most recent file labeled Yesterday Apartment Audio. It was from yesterday evening, after I'd gotten home from discovering the first set of files. My own voice filled the laptop speakers through earbuds I hadn't noticed were plugged in. I can't believe this. What kind of sick person records their family like this? I have to tell Jake, but how do I even begin to explain? It was me, talking to myself in my apartment. She'd somehow bugged my apartment. Jake's voice called out, "Hey, you in there? I could use a hand with this shelving unit." I quickly closed everything and shoved the laptop shut, my heart pounding so hard I was sure Jake would hear it when he walked in. "Coming," I called back, but my voice cracked. For the next 3 hours, I helped Jake move furniture while my mind raced. Sarah hadn't just been recording family dinners, she'd been conducting full surveillance on me for over a year. But why? What was the endgame? I had to get back to that laptop. I had to see what else was in those files. Around 4 p.m., Jake went upstairs to shower. This was my chance. I rushed back to the laptop, opened it, and dove deeper into the folders. There was a document called Timeline Analysis.docx. I opened it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a detailed timeline of my life over the past 18 months. Every date I'd been on, every job interview, every doctor appointment. But it wasn't just dates, it was analysis. Psychological analysis. Subject shows signs of anxiety when discussing financial stress. Exploit this vulnerability. Subject's relationship with family is his primary emotional support system. Disrupting this could cause maximum psychological impact. Subject responds well to perceived emergencies involving family members. Could be useful for manipulation. This wasn't just creepy surveillance. This was a psychological profile. She was studying me like I was some kind of experiment. I scrolled down and found a section labeled Phase 2 Implementation. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. Now that I have sufficient behavioral data, it's time to begin active manipulation. Subject needs to be isolated from family support system gradually. Jake must be turned against subject without suspecting external influence. There were detailed plans, specific conversations she was going to have with Jake, designed to make him doubt me. Fabricated stories about things I had supposedly said or done. She'd even planned to edit audio recordings to make it sound like I was talking behind Jake's back. But the worst part was the final section. End goal. Complete psychological breakdown leading to removal from family unit. Jake will side with me once subject is discredited. Parents will follow Jake's lead. Subject will be completely isolated, potentially leading to self-harm or elimination from family permanently. I heard Jake's shower turn off upstairs. Jake would be down any minute. I scrolled frantically through more files, trying to understand the scope of this. There was an entire folder dedicated to Jake, too. Hours of recordings of him talking to me, to his friends, to his coworkers. She'd been analyzing him just as thoroughly, but for different reasons. A document called JakeManipulationProgress.docx showed her strategy. Subject is completely unaware of surveillance, responds positively to ego stroking and sexual manipulation, can be easily turned against family members by framing situations as personal betrayals. There were transcripts of conversations she'd had with Jake, conversations where she'd planted seeds of doubt about me, little comments about how I seemed jealous of his happiness, how I'd been acting weird lately, how she was worried I might be going through some kind of mental health crisis. And it was working. Looking back, I could see how Jake had been slightly more distant lately, how he'd been asking me if I was okay more often, how he'd seemed less enthusiastic about our brother time together. I found a file called emergencyprotocols.docx. It was a contingency plan for what to do if her surveillance was discovered. The plan was chilling. She would claim I was stalking her, that I'd been making inappropriate advances, that I'd been acting increasingly unstable, and she was collecting evidence to protect herself and Jake. She had edited audio files ready to go, conversations where she'd spliced together my voice saying things I never said. She had photos of me near their house that she had taken herself, but cropped to make it look like I was lurking around uninvited. Jake's footsteps were coming down the stairs. I quickly photographed as many screens as I could, then closed the laptop and rushed back to the living room just as he appeared. "Ready to tackle that bookshelf?" he asked, completely oblivious. I nodded, but I felt like I was moving through water. Everything felt surreal. How do you act normal when you've just discovered that your brother's wife is a calculating sociopath who's been orchestrating a psychological warfare campaign against you for over a year? We worked in silence for a while, but I kept catching Jake glancing at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Finally, he spoke up. "Hey, can I ask you something? And I want you to be honest." My blood turned to ice. "Of course. Sarah mentioned that you've been, acting weird lately. She's worried about you. She thinks you might be going through something but trying to hide it from the family." There it was. It was already starting. She had already executed her plan. "What do you mean, acting weird?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake set down the screwdriver he had been holding and looked at me directly. "She said you've been asking a lot of personal questions about our relationship, about our finances, about her background, about our future plans. She thinks you might be jealous or maybe going through some kind of crisis where you're fixated on other people's lives because your own isn't going the way you want." I stared at him. Every question she had referenced was actually her questioning me. She had been interrogating me about my life, my relationships, my financial situation, my career goals. But somehow she'd flipped it in Jake's mind, made it seem like I was the one prying into their lives. "Jake, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Sarah has been... She also said you've been driving by our house at odd hours. She's seen your car parked across the street multiple times, just sitting there." My mouth fell open. "What? When?" She didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but she's kept track. Last Tuesday around 11 p.m., Friday afternoon, Sunday morning before you came over for dinner help. I had never been to their house at those times, ever. But as I thought about it, I realized how easy it would be for her to fabricate this. She could have taken photos of cars that looked like mine, or even just claimed she'd seen me without any proof. "Jake, I swear to you, I have never driven by your house except when I was invited. You have to believe me." The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He didn't believe me. She'd already planted enough doubt that my denial sounded like lies. "Maybe you don't remember," he said gently. "Sarah thinks you might be having some kind of episode. Memory problems, paranoid thoughts, obsessive behavior. She's been researching it, and she thinks you might need professional help." I felt the walls closing in. This was her endgame. She was going to have me labeled as mentally unstable, and my own family was going to help me do it.
"I need to show you something," I said, pulling out my phone. "What?" I scrolled to the photos I'd taken of her laptop screen. Sarah has been recording our family dinners. She's been collecting surveillance footage of me for over a year. She's been analyzing all of us, planning to manipulate— "Stop," Jake said firmly. "Just stop." He wasn't even looking at the photos. He was looking at me with this expression of pity mixed with fear. "This is exactly what she was worried about," he said softly. "She said you might start making accusations, creating elaborate conspiracy theories. She said this is how these kinds of mental health crises often manifest." I felt like I was drowning. "Jake, please, just look at the photos. Just look at them." "Photos of what? Her laptop screen? Photos you took while snooping through her computer while she was at work?" His voice was getting harder. "Do you realize how this sounds? Do you realize how this looks?" He was right. Everything I'd done, sneaking around, going through her computer, taking photos of her files, it all looked exactly like the behavior of someone having a paranoid breakdown. She'd planned this perfectly. She'd created a situation where discovering her surveillance would make me look like the unstable one. "She's been recording our phone calls, Jake. She's bugged my apartment. She has files full of psychological analyses of our entire family." Jake stood up and took a step back from me. "Okay, I think you need to go home. We'll talk about this later when you've had some time to process." "Process? Jake, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm trying to warn you that your wife is concerned about your mental health. She's been trying to help you, trying to figure out how to approach this sensitively, and you're repaying her by breaking into her computer and making insane accusations?" I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and I saw that it was already too late. Sarah had done her work too well. In his mind, I was the threat. I was the problem. I was the one who needed to be managed and contained. "I'm going to call Mom and Dad," Jake said, reaching for his phone. "We need to have a family meeting. We need to get you help." "Jake, wait!" "No, this has gone too far. Sarah was right. We should have intervened weeks ago." I realized that anything I said now would only make things worse. If I kept insisting, I'd just prove her point about my mental state. If I backed down, she'd win by default. I was trapped in a perfect catch-22. "I'll go," I said quietly. "But Jake, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll look at those photos. Even if you think I'm losing it, even if you think I'm paranoid, just look at them, please." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, I'll look, but you need to promise me you'll see someone. A therapist, a counselor, someone. I promise." I left their house feeling completely defeated. Sarah had won. She'd turned my own brother against me, and she'd done it so skillfully that even showing him evidence of her manipulation would only reinforce his belief that I was unstable.
But as I drove home, something occurred to me. Sarah had made one mistake in her planning. She'd been so focused on discrediting me that she'd overlooked something important. I wasn't her only target. I wasn't even her primary target. Jake was.
I spent the entire night going through everything I'd photographed from Sarah's laptop, and I finally understood what I was looking at. This wasn't just about isolating me from the family. I was collateral damage in a much bigger scheme. The files about Jake weren't just surveillance. They were a blueprint for financial manipulation. Sarah had been documenting Jake's spending habits, his investment accounts, his retirement fund, even his credit score. She knew exactly how much money he had, where it was kept, and how to access it. More importantly, she'd been systematically learning about my parents' financial situation through Jake. There was a folder called Estate Planning that made my blood run cold. Sarah had been collecting information about my parents' will, their property deeds, their life insurance policies. She knew Dad's social security number, Mom's bank account details, even the combination to their safe, which Jake had shared with her in case of emergency. But the most chilling discovery was a document called Timeline Acceleration. It was a plan to speed up her access to family assets by creating a crisis that would put Jake in charge of my parents' financial affairs. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. She was going to stage my complete mental breakdown in front of the family, then use my deteriorating mental state to convince my parents that Jake needed to take over their financial affairs to protect them from me. According to her timeline, I would become increasingly erratic and potentially dangerous. She'd already planted the seeds with Jake, but she was planning to escalate things dramatically. The next phase involved me supposedly showing up at their house uninvited, making threats, possibly even appearing to stalk or harass family members. Of course, these incidents would be fabricated, but she had the technology to make them look real. She could edit audio recordings to make it sound like I was making threats. She could manipulate photos to show me places I'd never been. She could even use deepfake technology to create video evidence of me doing things I'd never done. The endgame was having me committed to a psychiatric facility, giving Jake power of attorney over my parents' affairs, while they were too stressed and scared to make rational decisions about their son's condition. Once Jake had control of the family assets, Sarah would slowly manipulate him into making financial decisions that would ultimately benefit her. She'd already researched how to create shell companies, how to move money offshore, how to make assets disappear. The most terrifying part was that she'd done this before. Buried in her files was a folder called Previous Projects. It contained detailed documentation of at least 3 other families she'd infiltrated over the past decade. Each time, she'd married into the family, gained access to their financial information, then systematically destroyed the family from within while extracting their assets. In one case, she'd convinced a husband that his brother was embezzling from the family business. The brother ended up in prison for fraud, apparently with fabricated evidence, while Sarah and her husband gained control of the company. 6 months later, the business was sold and the money disappeared into offshore accounts. The husband died in a car accident shortly after discovering the truth. Another case involved an elderly couple who'd taken Sarah in as a daughter-in-law after their son's death. She'd convinced them that their surviving son was trying to steal their inheritance, and then had him declared mentally incompetent. The couple died within a year of each other under suspicious circumstances, leaving everything to Sarah. She was a professional, a serial killer who used psychology and financial manipulation instead of violence, and my family was her current target. I had to get this information to Jake, but I knew he wouldn't believe me. Sarah had already poisoned him against me too effectively. I needed a different approach. I called my parents at 7 a.m. "Mom, I need you and Dad to come over to my apartment right now. Don't tell Jake or Sarah. It's about Jake's safety, and I need you to see something before they get to you." There was a long pause. "Honey, Jake already called us. He's worried about you. He said you've been acting strangely, and that you made some concerning accusations about Sarah yesterday." My heart sunk. She was already one step ahead. "Mom, please, I know how this sounds, but I have evidence that Sarah is not who she claims to be. She's been manipulating our family for months, and Jake is in danger." "We're coming over." Dad's voice came through the phone. He'd been listening on speaker. "Whatever's going on, we need to handle this as a family." "No, Dad, you can't bring Jake. Sarah will have prepared him for this. She'll have coached him on how to handle my accusations. You need to see the evidence first, before she has a chance to discredit it." "Son, you're scaring us," Mom said softly. "This sounds like paranoid thinking. Jake is worried that you might be having some kind of breakdown." I realized I was fighting a losing battle. Sarah had already positioned herself as the concerned family member trying to help, while painting me as the unstable one who needed intervention. Anything I said would only reinforce that narrative. "Okay," I said. "Bring Jake. But I need you to promise me something. Before we discuss my mental health, before we talk about getting me help, I need you to look at some evidence. Just look at it. Can you promise me that?" They agreed, and I spent the next hour preparing. I printed out the most damning documents from Sarah's files, organized them chronologically, and created a timeline that would be impossible to dismiss as fabricated. When they arrived, Jake looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red, his hair was disheveled, and he kept glancing around my apartment like he was expecting me to do something unpredictable. "Before we start," I said, "I want everyone to know that I understand how this looks. I understand that my behavior yesterday seemed erratic. I understand that you're all concerned about my mental state, but I need you to look at this evidence before we discuss anything else." I spread the documents out on my coffee table. Bank statements, psychological profiles, surveillance photos, manipulation timeline, and the documentation of Sarah's previous victims. The room was silent as they processed what they were seeing. Jake picked up one of the documents, a printed email from Sarah to Marcus, discussing the current project timeline and expected asset extraction within 18 months. "This can't be real," he said quietly. "Jake, look at the metadata on the photos. Look at the timestamps on the documents. Look at the email headers. This is all real." Dad was examining the documentation of Sarah's previous victims. "These people, they're all dead or imprisoned?" "Yes, and in each case, Sarah walked away with millions of dollars in assets while the families were destroyed." Mom was staring at the psychological profiles of our family. "She wrote this about us? About our private conversations? She's been recording everything for a year. Every family dinner, every phone call, every private moment. She's been studying us like laboratory animals." Jake was reading through the manipulation timeline, his face growing paler with each page. "She planned this? She planned to turn me against you?" "It's all there, Jake. Every conversation she had with you about my strange behavior was scripted. Every concern she raised about my mental health was part of a plan to isolate me from the family." "But why?" Mom asked. "What does she gain from this?" I showed them the estate planning documents. "She's after your money, Mom. All of it. The house, the investments, the life insurance, everything. The plan was to have me committed, convince you that Jake needed to take over your financial affairs to protect you from me, then slowly manipulate Jake into making financial decisions that would ultimately give her control of everything." The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Jake spoke. "We need to call the police." "No," I said. "We need to be smarter than that. Sarah is a professional manipulator. She's been doing this for years and she's never been caught. If we just call the police, she'll have a story ready. She'll claim I'm stalking her, that I broke into her computer, that I'm having a psychotic break. She has fabricated evidence to support that narrative." "Then what do we do?" Dad asked. "I'd been thinking about this all night. We need to catch her in the act. We need to get her to reveal her true intentions in a way that can't be dismissed or manipulated." "How?" "We're going to give her exactly what she wants. We're going to stage my complete mental breakdown."
I spent the next 3 days planning the most important performance of my life. Everything had to be perfect, because I'd only get one chance to expose Sarah before she disappeared forever. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would stage a family intervention, where I would appear to have a complete mental breakdown, giving Sarah the opportunity to reveal her true manipulative nature, while we secretly recorded everything. Jake was the key to making it work. He had to appear genuinely concerned about my mental health while Sarah was around, which meant I had to actually convince him that I was becoming increasingly unstable. It was a dangerous game. If I pushed too hard, he might actually believe I was losing it. We set up the intervention for Sunday evening at my parents' house. Mom called Sarah and Jake, explaining that I'd been having episodes and that we needed to discuss getting me professional help. Sarah immediately volunteered to help research treatment options, which was exactly what we'd expected. What we didn't expect was how prepared she'd be. When they arrived, Sarah brought a folder full of printed articles about mental health crises, contact information for psychiatric facilities, and even a draft petition for involuntary commitment. She'd been planning this intervention before we had even suggested it. "I've been so worried about him," she told my parents, while Jake and I were in the kitchen. "He's been exhibiting classic signs of paranoid psychosis. The surveillance delusions, the conspiracy theories, the aggressive behavior toward me. I think he might be dangerous." I was listening from the kitchen, and it took all my self-control not to react. She was setting the stage perfectly, painting me as an imminent threat that needed to be contained. The intervention began with Mom expressing concern about my recent behavior. I played my part, becoming increasingly agitated as the conversation progressed. I accused Sarah of manipulating the family, of recording our conversations, of having ulterior motives. "He's been obsessed with me," Sarah said, her voice trembling with perfectly performed emotion. "He's been asking Jake invasive questions about our relationship, our finances, our private life. He's been driving by our house at all hours. I'm scared of him." "That's not true," I shouted, standing up abruptly. "You're the one who's been surveilling us. You're the one who's been recording everything." "See?" Sarah said, looking at my parents with tears in her eyes. "This is exactly what I was worried about. He's creating elaborate fantasies to justify his obsession with me." Jake put his hand on my shoulder. "Hey, calm down. We're all here because we care about you." "You don't understand," I said, letting my voice crack with emotion. "She's not who she says she is. She's done this to other families. She's going to destroy us." Sarah pulled out her phone. "I think we need to call someone. He's becoming violent." "I'm not violent. I'm trying to protect you." And then Sarah made her mistake. "Maybe we should consider having him committed," she said quietly to my parents. "I've researched some facilities that specialize in this kind of paranoid psychosis. There's one about an hour away that has excellent reviews." My parents looked shocked. "Committed? Isn't that a bit extreme?" "I don't think so," Sarah said. "Look at him. He's clearly a danger to himself and others. And Jake, you need to think about your safety too. People with this kind of condition often become fixated on family members. They can become violent without warning." Jake looked uncomfortable. "I don't know if that's necessary." "It is necessary," Sarah insisted. "I've been researching this for weeks. I've even consulted with a psychiatrist about his symptoms." She agreed that involuntary commitment might be the safest option. "You consulted with a psychiatrist about me?" I asked, my voice suddenly deadly quiet. "I had to," Sarah said. "I was worried about everyone's safety. Without my consent, without my knowledge, you're not capable of making rational decisions about your mental health. Someone has to advocate for what's best for the family." And there it was. The mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw the cold calculation in her eyes. She wasn't a concerned family member. She was a predator who had identified a threat to her plan and was moving to eliminate it. "You want to have me committed," I said slowly. "I want to get you help," she said, but her tone was different now, more authoritative, more controlling. "And while I'm locked away in a psychiatric facility, who's going to take care of my parents' affairs? Who's going to make sure they're protected from my dangerous behavior?" "Jake will," she said without hesitation. "He's the responsible one. He's the one who can make rational decisions. And you'll help him, of course. You'll help him manage my parents' finances, their property, their investments. If necessary, someone has to protect them from you." I looked at my parents, then at Jake. "Do you hear what she's saying? She's not talking about getting me help. She's talking about taking control of our family." "You're being paranoid," she said, but there was steel in her voice now. "This is exactly the kind of delusional thinking that makes you dangerous." Am I being delusional, or am I the only one who sees what's really happening here? I walked over to the bookshelf where Dad kept his old recording equipment, a relic from his days as a freelance journalist. I picked up the small digital recorder that had been running since the beginning of our conversation. "What's that?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp. "Insurance," I said, holding up the device. "Every word of this conversation has been recorded." The change in Sarah's demeanor was immediate and terrifying. The concerned family member disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Give me that," she said, reaching for the recorder. "No," I said, stepping back. "Give me that right now," she repeated, her voice completely different now. Gone was the trembling concern, replaced by barely controlled rage. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Jake asked, clearly confused by her sudden transformation. "He's been recording us without consent. That's illegal. That's stalking behavior." "Actually," I said, "in this state, it's perfectly legal to record conversations as long as one party consents. And since I'm part of this conversation, I consent." Sarah's face went white. "You planned this?" "Yes," I said, "I planned this. Just like you planned to have me committed. Just like you planned to manipulate Jake into taking control of my parents' finances. Just like you planned to destroy our family." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice was shaking now. "Don't you? Should I tell them about your previous projects? About the families you've destroyed? About the people who are dead or in prison because of your manipulations?" The room was dead silent. Everyone was staring at Sarah, waiting for her response. "You're insane," she whispered. "Am I? Should I tell them about Marcus? About the shell companies? About the offshore accounts? About the estate planning documents you've been collecting?" Sarah's face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, rage, and finally something like resignation. "You went through my computer," she said. "Yes, I did. That's a violation of privacy. That's illegal. So is fraud. So is identity theft. So is conspiracy to commit financial crimes." Sarah looked around the room at my family, all of whom were staring at her with growing horror. "You don't understand," she said, her voice becoming desperate. "You don't understand what I've been through, what I've had to do to survive." "Survive?" I asked. "Is that what you call destroying families and stealing their money?" "I never hurt anyone. I never used violence. I just took what I needed to survive. You had people imprisoned. You had them killed. That wasn't my fault. That was just what happened." Jake stood up slowly. "Sarah, what is he talking about?" She looked at him with something like genuine emotion for the first time since I'd known her. "Jake, I love you. I really do. This was supposed to be different. You were supposed to be different." "Different from what?" "The others," she whispered. And then she told us everything. Sarah's real name was Catherine Morrison. She'd been running marriage-based financial cons for over 15 years. She'd targeted vulnerable men from wealthy families, married them, gained access to their family assets, then systematically destroyed the families from within while extracting their money. She'd learned to read people, to understand their psychological vulnerabilities, to exploit their love and trust for financial gain. She'd developed sophisticated techniques for surveillance, manipulation, and evidence fabrication. "I never meant for people to get hurt," she said, sobbing now. "I just needed money. I just needed to survive." "Survive what?" Mom asked gently. "The system," Sarah said. "The system that threw me away when I was 16. The system that failed me over and over again. I learned that the only way to survive was to take what I needed, because no one was going to give it to me." "But why our family? Why us?" Dad asked. Sarah looked at Jake with something like genuine affection. "Because Jake was kind to me. Because he loved me. Because for the first time in my life, someone treated me like I mattered." "So you decided to destroy us?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I decided to survive. I decided to take what I needed to never be vulnerable again. By having me committed? By removing the threat. You were going to ruin everything. You were going to expose me before I could secure my future." "Our future," Jake said. "You mean our future?" Sarah looked at him with pity. "Jake, you were never going to be part of my future. You were just the means to an end." The room was silent, except for the sound of Sarah's crying. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to go this far." "How far did you want it to go?" I asked. "Just far enough. Just far enough to disappear."
Sarah disappeared that night. While we were calling the police, while we were trying to figure out what to do next, she simply vanished. Jake went home to find their house empty, her clothes gone, her computer wiped clean. But Sarah made one final mistake. In her emotional breakdown, she'd mentioned an address, a storage unit where she kept backup files in case she ever needed to disappear quickly. The police found the storage unit 3 days later. What they discovered inside was worse than anything I'd imagined. Files on over 24 families spanning 15 years, detailed psychological profiles, financial records, surveillance footage, and manipulation timelines, evidence of systematic fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. But the worst part was the section labeled failures. These were the families where Sarah's plans had gone wrong, where her manipulations had been discovered or had failed to achieve their intended results. In each case, she'd implemented what she called termination protocols. The husband who died in a car accident after discovering her fraud, his brake lines had been cut. The elderly couple who died within a year of each other, they'd been slowly poisoned with insulin injections. The brother who'd been imprisoned for fraud, the evidence against him had been fabricated using Sarah's sophisticated audio and video editing capabilities. Sarah wasn't just a financial predator, she was a serial killer who used psychology and manipulation instead of violence as her primary weapon, but she was perfectly willing to resort to murder when her other methods failed. The FBI is now investigating over 30 suspicious deaths connected to Sarah's activities over the past 2 decades. They believe she may be responsible for one of the most sophisticated and long-running serial fraud schemes in American history. We were lucky. We caught her before she moved to her termination protocols, but I can't stop thinking about how close we came to becoming just another failure in her files. Jake is in therapy now, trying to process the fact that he was married to a sociopath who was planning to destroy his family and possibly kill him once she'd extracted everything she needed. He's struggling with the fact that nothing about their relationship was real, that every moment of happiness was fabricated, that he was just another mark in a long line of victims. My parents have increased security at their house and are working with financial advisors to protect their assets. They're also in therapy, trying to understand how someone so dangerous could have infiltrated our family so completely. As for me, I'm still processing everything. The surveillance, the manipulation, the psychological warfare. It's going to take time to feel safe again. But I'm alive, my family is safe, and Sarah is gone. The FBI believes she's fled the country, probably to a non-extradition jurisdiction where she can start over with a new identity. They're working with international law enforcement to track her down, but she's had 15 years to perfect her escape protocols. Sometimes I wonder if she's already started again somewhere else, if there's another family out there right now welcoming a charming, mysterious woman into their lives, not knowing that they're inviting a predator into their home. But I also know that we stopped her. We exposed her. We saved ourselves and potentially saved her future victims. The recording I made of our final conversation has been used as evidence in the FBI's investigation. Sarah's breakdown, her confession, her admission of previous crimes, it's all on tape. Even if she's never captured, her methods have been exposed, her techniques documented, her patterns identified. Other families will be warned. Other potential victims will be protected. We survived Catherine Morrison, the woman who called herself Sarah. We survived one of the most sophisticated predators in modern criminal history. And we did it because we refused to let her destroy us from within. If you're reading this and anything about your family situation feels off, if someone in your life is asking too many questions or seems to know too much about your private affairs, trust your instincts. Don't let anyone convince you that your concerns are paranoid or irrational. Sometimes the people who seem most concerned about your mental health are the ones who are actually trying to destroy it. Sarah taught us that evil doesn't always announce itself with violence or obvious criminality. Sometimes it comes disguised as love, as concern, as family. But it can be defeated, as long as you're willing to fight for the truth, no matter how impossible it seems. We fought for the truth, and we won.